Let's start right away. Please welcome Lee Unkrich, director, Toy Story 3. David O. Russell, director, The Fighter. Tom Hooper, director, The King's Speech. Debra, director, Winter's Bone. Charles Ferguson, director, Inside Job. Darren Aronofsky, director, Black Swan. And please welcome our moderator. He has been moderating this panel for the past few years. He is part of the family here at the Santa Barbara Film Festival. He's the editorial director of Variety and is a longtime columnist and is also co-host of Show Business on NBC in LA and San Francisco and San Diego, and in the house on the Anchor Network across the US, Sundance channels across Europe and Asia. Please welcome Peter Bart.
Good morning, everyone. I always thought this was perfect timing for this event because it falls right at the peak of that pagan ritual known as Oscar. So everyone you see here is both exhausted and also, I think, delighted to be here in this island of civility where people actually pay attention to cinema and not just to the awards buzz. So having said that, I realize that last year's panel we had a sort of a domestic nuances taking place because next to me was Jim Cameron and next to him was Catherine Bigelow. And as you remember, there was a sort of interesting little subtext or tensions. And I guess I should ask folks, is anyone here hooked up with anyone else? So, what all this is about is this thing, which most people don't see arrive today. This is the Oscar ballot. And I've been a voter for some 30 years. And the Oscar ballot is fascinating. There are really some obvious things to decide on, like 10 best pictures. You folks are familiar with that list. But as an Oscar voter, I'm also expected to vote on sound mixing. And like Salt is on the list of sound mixing. I remember when I saw Salt, I didn't leave thinking, boy, was that mixed beautifully. And makeup, one of the three candidates is Barney's version. Now, Paul Giamatti's a terrific guy. I didn't think his makeup was that great. But that is what we get, and arrived this morning, and 5,000 plus voters, like myself, are expected to fill it out religiously, which we do. So what I'm going to do this morning, folks, is to throw out my usual list of inane questions. And if it's directed at one person, I would be delighted if others also responded and maybe took issue with anything that I said or anyone else has said. But one question I couldn't resist is simply this. Since most of you here, Lee Unkrich, this is not for you, most of you here really made films on extraordinarily lean, disciplined budgets. I'm tempted to ask you, starting with you, Darren, if you had twice the budget and twice as long a schedule, would your picture have been better?
That's always the big question. We actually went out looking for, I think the original budget was about $28 or $30 million for Black Swan, and we ended up with 13 in the end. So it would have been better for me because I would have gotten paid. Because that's always the first thing to go. It's above the line. You know, it's like, okay, that's chopped off. Now let's start seeing how many days we can do this in. But I think, you know, that's always the boundary. That's the game for all of us in independent film. We've all come from that school. You know, you find out what your restrictions are, and then you sort of create a visual language that works, you know, within that. You know, when I had $60,000 to do Pi, you know, we chose to do black and white because I knew I couldn't control the color palette. I just didn't have enough resources, and I knew black and white would sort of cut that out of the equation. Actually, the black and white we shot was more expensive than color film because it was black and white reversal, but I knew we would be saving money because of all the savings we do in that. So it would have been a completely different movie. You create a film with the amount of time you have. In this case, it was 40 days, and we knew every day was going to be a struggle, which it was, and we just tried to push the limit of that $13 million every single day.
I remember running into Mike Nichols day after he finished shooting The Graduate, and he said to me, you know, I think every time that I had a compromise because of cost, I think the scene was better because I was desperate. Debra, your budget was 2? How the hell did you do that?
Well, it depends on who's going to go down there with you. You know, you have to go with a group of people that want to work in that way and are willing. 24 and a half days means that some of it is shot in a documentary style in the sense that that's what the crew looks like and that's how they're moving. It's not that it's documentary techniques, but the actual structure, infrastructure resembles a very agile, mobile situation, and there are no sets. So, and the lighting package is tiny. Everything is about it being adroit and swift moving and low impact. Had we had more money, we would have crushed the very piece of land that we were, you know, invited to work on. We would have rolled over the local participants. We would have been seen even more as outsiders as we already were. We were outsiders. And so the connection of our team with a local team, I think, would have been inhibited and marred by a kind of money that would be both intimidating and seem egregious, maybe unconscionable. It would have been hard to defend coming down with any more resources than we had. And I don't think it would have made it a better film for all the reasons of we didn't need to alter, we needed to be very quiet and careful about what we were filming, where we were filming. So I think for this production, I think the missing is like the 2.2, you know, the 0.2 for the two producers that deferred their above the line situation, you know, and so I think in this sense, a frugal budget was commensurate with the story we were trying to tell.
Yeah, just for the sake of the folks here, he who defers never sees.
Except when you have a transparent, honest, hardworking distributor like Roadside, who will absolutely make sure that those two women, you know, receive their, you know.
Tom, do you all want to speak to that issue?
Well, I definitely think one of the differences is we'd had more budget. I mean, we made it for about $14 million on film. Wonderful. You know, was that there were some people I collaborated with a number of times, and it is tough to keep going back and saying, "Would you work for, you know, less than you should?" and keep putting in those favours. And particularly in post, where we really ran out of money. I mean, you know, particularly on the sound side, it was very tough, the deals we had to do to get the picture made, and it would be nice to feel like you could all, you know, you could pay people generously when you work. So that would be a difference. But I mean, I think the key relationship is the relationship between budget and scrutiny or oversight. In my head, one of the bonuses of working on a low budget is the level of scrutiny you're under from the financiers is much reduced, because you know, no one's hugely anxious about it, because no one stands to lose a ton of money. And I think in the end, I've learned over the time I've been directing, the most valuable thing you have is your freedom. And I would always work for less budget to have that freedom. And that trade I'd make every time.
Well, I wonder if one advantage to scrambling for the financing is simply that there is no studio to tell you what to do, because there are a bunch of financial entities. Now, David, I kept trying to follow how the fighter came together, and I lost track, so I don't know who you ended up answering to.
Well, it was at Paramount, and then it fell apart many times. Mark Wahlberg carried it for about 4 or 5 years. Brad Pitt was going to do it. Matt Damon was going to do it. They had a $60 million, $70 million budget. We ended up financed by Relativity. Darren was going to do it one time. Was that with Matt Damon, or who was that going to be?
Brad Pitt was involved for a little bit, and then Matt Damon. And it was, yeah, I went through a few actors.
And then when that didn't happen, then you went and said, I'm going to go make this movie called The Wrestler, right?
No, I read The Fighter and thought it's an amazing story. And Scott Silver, who wrote the script, I went to film school with, and he's from Worcester, which is right near Lowell. And so I begged him to do it, and he eventually did it. And then went through a few actors, and then The Wrestler came together, so I did that. And then it was like, you know, more Bengay or girls in tutus. I did, so Dave.
Well, Liam,
How's that Bengay? How you handling that Bengay? It's okay.
So by the time it came together, Relativity financed it, and we had 11 below the line. 33 days, 3 days to do the fights, and 30 days to do the rest. It was the closest to my first film, Smacking the Monkey, which was more like Winter's Bone in scale. You know, we shot that in 25 days. I frankly liked the level of focus and leanness and no-nonsenseness that it gave us. And I think necessity breeds invention, keeps ego out. And we were unified in a humble kind of love for the people of Lowell and for the story. And that all came from Mark. So that was an asset from a creative point of view. And it caused us to be disciplined at the script phase, because the script must be gotten below 110 pages if you are to make a movie in 33 days. I mean, for me, and really, really do each one of those scenes.
that's only 100 pages shorter than Social Network. So Lee, I must ask you, having worked with Disney and Pixar, with limitless amounts of money,
but you know what? The thing is, yes, you know, I made a film that cost a lot more than any film at this table. But when you're making an animated film, because they take so long, because they take years and years. I worked on Toy Story 3 for 4 years, and with a very large crew. So naturally, that means it's going to become expensive. But I don't want anyone to feel like we have an open checkbook to make this movie. In fact, we were shielded quite a bit from the money that was being spent, and we were allowed to just completely focus on the creativity of making the film. And as everybody is pointing out, you always make better decisions when you have limitations, when the sky is not the limit. And every step of the way, we had limitations upon us, many of them self-imposed, because we knew that we would come up with smarter ideas if we had those limitations. So, I mean, I know that doesn't mean a lot when you've made a movie for $2 million, but I mean, it's.
So let me ask you a really stupid question. How do you handle adulation? I mean, everybody must come up to you and say, Toy Story 3, this is my favorite movie in the history of mankind. So did you ever just say to somebody, oh, shut up?
No, I love it. I spent the first year and a half of this movie waking up every morning feeling like I wanted to throw up over the side of the bed. Because there was an enormous amount of pressure on me to not only be making the new Pixar movie after a string of 10 that had all been very successful critically and financially, but to be making a sequel to the Toy Story films, which have been beloved for a number of years by people all over the world. I just knew there was a very real chance that I would go down in history as being the guy who made the crappy sequel to the Toy Story movies. A very real possibility that could happen. And that fear drove me each and every day to not let that happen, or to do everything in my power to not let that happen. So I love the adulation, because my crew and I worked really hard for a long time, and it could very well have gone the other direction. So we drink it in.
But see, everybody on the stage, it seems to me, the pictures you made moved the needle. They really had a significant impact in one way or another, except for Mr. Ferguson. Because the facts about Inside Job is that in the world that you depicted, nothing ever fucking changes. You don't do Do you feel that way on
Well, this part of the world isn't changing fast, that's for sure. The Obama administration has been a gigantic, tragic disappointment. I think the Obama administration will go down in history, at least in this domain. With regard to things like Egypt and other matters, the verdict might be very different. But with regard to these issues, which are very important issues about the structure and the future of our society, when Barack Obama was elected, he had an extraordinary, unique chance to do something about these questions. He had an incredible mandate, a heavily Democratic Congress, the country was in deep crisis, and he had, a moment. And many of us, including myself, were hopeful, based on the things he had said during his campaign, that something would actually happen. And it was a huge disappointment when he took that moment and used it to appoint as his economic and regulatory team a group of people who had, in fact, caused this crisis. And
you might say he really had casting problems.
very, very severe casting problems, yes. And the new cast isn't any better. People who've just come in as replacements for the first set of people who left, they're not any better. In some cases, they're worse. There are several people at senior levels in the administration who arguably should be in prison, and that's disturbing. It's very disturbing.
Well, I feel you should get an Oscar. I feel you should get an Oscar for making the most depressing movie.
Thank you so much.
So, yeah, I read, as a New York magazine, I think that you changed during the course of this picture from being a control freak to being an out-of-control freak. What struck me as a very interesting description. Would you explain that?
I had no idea what that writer was writing about, so I think he was trying to make a point about this probably what happened between the fountain and the wrestler. I think, but it definitely my approach to filmmaking changed. I don't know if it changed radically, but it was definitely going from a film where everything was very, very every shot was very, very symmetrical and controlled to, taking on this sort of cinema verite style and sort of allowing the actor complete freedom. It sort of came out of a necessity of working with Mickey Rourke, who, doesn't really respect marks or lines or directors or filmmaking.
Wonderful, but he's nice.
Respects the square footage in his trailer, and that's about it. I love Mickey, and he's one of the great actors, but it definitely changed the way I had to work. And then I tried to bring that with sort of the formalism, because someone like Natalie Portman, is incredibly disciplined and technical, as well as being really talented. So I could bring back some of the other type of filmmaking that I'd done earlier and combine it with some of the lessons I got from The Wrestler. So maybe that's it.
I think what the writer was also suggesting, that you wanted, in a sense, your actors, Natalie, to lose control of themselves, to be out there.
Well, I always talk, it's funny because people sort of accuse me of pushing actors, and I don't really push them. I just sort of, I kind of remind them of why they've started in the business. And if you go down to a acting school on Melrose Avenue, all you'll see is a bunch of, student actors screaming Stella, crying their eyes out, doing anything to emote. And I think, in the Hollywood system, it's sort of, people forget that. I've had actors on set when they're like, well, I can't do anything more than 3 takes. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you want to do, sit around the craft service table and wait for them to light for another 7 hours? This is our chance to, just do stuff. And this is, it's our set. Let's have fun and let's push each other. And, so I don't find actors ever lose themselves. I mean, Ellen Burstyn or Natalie Portman or any of the other kind of psycho trips my actors have taken, I think they're always in control. And acting on film, it's a 30-second burst of intensity. And then you call cut, and all the actors I've worked with, when you call cut, they're back to being who they are, you know, because there's a movie camera there, and there's the boom person there, and there's the makeup person in their face, and you take a breath, and then you go back into it. I think the intensity of the physicality of Black Swan, with the kind of emotional stuff, with all the training Natalie had to do, was really, really tough on her. But she never got that close to the edge, I don't think.
But Debra, when I run into Jennifer Lawrence, I rarely have seen an actress who in person seems more of a contradictory character than the character that you had her play. That was an extraordinary performance in an extraordinary movie. Did you do a great deal of rehearsing with her?
Jennifer was very willing to come down to southern Missouri before the shoot and spend a week on the location. We were shooting in a family's holler, using their homes, the various homes that were in that family property. She was willing to work with the young girl that lived in the house that we were going to be filming in, getting to know the animals on the property, learning things that we did, skinning workshops. She learned all the things that she was going to have to perform in the film. She was extremely amenable to that. She wanted to have that time, and she was also willing to go back to Kentucky, her home state, prior to that, and just reorient, listen to the dialect, get herself re-steeped into things that she had known and observed. She obviously has not come from any circumstances that resembled the film, but hearing voices of people who were using the dialect from the region and the accent, huge help just to have that in her.
See, when you said cut, I can't imagine that everyone just went back to their basic characters in that environment, because those were characters.
I mean, this is exactly for self-preservation what Darren is speaking about. I mean, actors absolutely do. They retreat to many. My experience is limited, but they retreat to a place that is to recharge, to get ready to go again, to contemplate what might be done differently, to respond to something that I might be asking of them. So it's a very very lucid, precise kind of retreat that they perform, and I think this is it's almost like the only way to go. And I also think that it varies very much between the actors, in terms of how they actually regroup before the next performance.
But Tom Hooper, is the game changed when an actor, in this case like Jeffrey Rush, feels that he really discovered and developed, nurtured the material, and I guess helped the process of transforming it, as did you, from a stage play into a screenplay? Does that change the relationship between director and actor?
I think probably Jeffrey felt rather unanchored in the character.
I can't quite hear you.
Jeffrey felt rather unanchored in the character at the beginning because we knew so little about Lionel Lowe. I mean, we had no photographs. We didn't know how many kids he had or what they were called. We didn't know where he grew up in Australia. He was a character consigned to the footnotes, the marginalia of history. Because the English famously aren't very relaxed about the idea of the need for therapy, unlike here in the state of California. And I'm sure the royal family were a little embarrassed by it, and so it's not surprising it was kind of pushed to the margins. And I think, despite his involvement from early on, I know it was only when we discovered the papers of Lionel Lowe belonged to the grandson, and we suddenly had photographs of him, and we could see his handwriting, and we could see the way he wrote, and we knew how many sons he had, and we knew about his wife, and we knew fragments of his biography that Jeffrey finally felt that he rather than inventing this character, there was these wonderful clues to go on. But I mean, I certainly think it gave him a strong sense of ownership on the project, and I do remember one rather interesting moment when his representatives were fighting for his right to arrive 6 days before the shoot, and he got on the phone with me and said, "Well, it's 5 weeks before. I'm not doing anything. Why don't I hop on the plane tomorrow?" And that kind of thing, when he's on your side and knows that it would be much more helpful for him to be there 5 weeks out in the same city as you, and then turning up and saying, why don't we start rehearsing, because I'm sitting in my hotel room. You know, that kind of, when you can form that kind of alliance with an actor early on, that he's carrying it with you, that makes a huge difference.
So David, I think the most discussed bit of casting, certainly, of any film is Christian Bale, who I notice in his acceptance speeches always responds in a different type of Cockney accent. So, how did you get to that place where you decided that he was right? And Mark was certainly part of that too, because Mark at some point, Mark Wahlberg had to say, he's got the better role.
I think what happened was that Christian so fell in love with the Dickie, to answer your awards thing about the accent, he so got into Dickie that his whole accent way of talking sort of morphed with Dickie's way of talking. And he said he hopes that people don't mind if Batman speaks like Dickie. Because he just loved it. And I think one of the reasons he loved it is that, you know, we have two types of casting in the picture which are against type, which I love to do and is very exciting for any director and very exciting for any actor. And when you add to that, you're playing real people with big hearts, that makes it all the more exciting, which is that Christian had never played such a garrulous, warm, outgoing guy, you know, which Dickie is. And he stayed in character all the time, and he loved it. And Lowell is a very, I hope you can feel from the film, it's a very warm, real place. No pretense, real people, and they really love each other, and everything is on the surface right there. Every emotion, every failure, every desire, every anger, every love is right there. And that's what I loved about the people, that's what I fell in love with. Amy Adams, same thing, had never played against type like that, you know, so she was excited to play such a powerful, sexy, tough woman. Mark did bring Christian to the table because their daughters go to the same school. And he'd had that idea from seeing Rescue Dawn and The Machinist. He knew that Christian would disappear into a character. And when I was speaking to Matt Damon recently, he said, interestingly, he said, this goes to show that the right person is supposed to play the right role at the right time. Because I don't believe that Matt Damon believes that he would ever have disappeared into that role as Christian did. And I'm fortunate enough to think that my producer, Mark Wahlberg, says the same of me, you know, that Darren would have made a beautiful film, no doubt, and for whatever the movie gods decided, you know, this is the film that got made, which got changed into a different voice for whatever reason.
Unfortunately, Mark then did Hereafter, where he was really wrong for the role.
Oh yeah, I did ask Mark if I said, you know, you realize you're giving him the flashier role,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And he said, yes, I understand Christian's going to get the flashier role. And he said, I'm okay with that because I want to be in the ring, I want to be fighting. And he played a guy closer. He takes the quiet guy, the James Garfield style of acting, where you are just grounded and emotional and real, which allows Melissa and Christian to be big. And that's a very generous actor that gives you that bit of emotion. And it was Mr. De Niro who said to me he felt that Mark's performance was perhaps the most underrated of the year because it is so quiet. And it's nice to know that, you know, Mr. Quiet himself, Mr. De Niro, you know, actually felt that he wanted to say that. Like, he made a big deal out of it to me and to Mark. He doesn't make a big deal out of much, you know, so that was nice.